Netflix premiered its wrestling docuseries Mr. McMahon weeks before the 2024 election, and I think I know why. The film chronicles the relationship between professional wrestling's ringmaster, Vince McMahon, and the ringmaster of politics, Donald Trump. The billionaires battled each other in Wrestlemania 23, and our guest for this episode will argue that, in large part because of these two men, professional wrestling has warped American culture, perhaps forever. The film confronts accusations against McMahon, including rape, workplace sexual harassment, sex trafficking, and failing to protect women and children in his employ from sexual abuse. For decades, McMahon avoided consequences thanks to hush money payments and out-of-court settlements, but earlier this year, one of the victims filed a lawsuit revealing unspeakably shocking details, and this has led to a federal investigation. This is Eric Byler. Truth be told, professional wrestling was a part of my childhood. I actually admired Vince McMahon's character. He was, after all, the journalist of the show. But this was before he created the sex offender character Mr. McMahon, and it became widely suspected that his fictional performances mirrored reality. After watching this series, I wanted to hear more from the only woman shown offering a socio-political critique. I sought out Professor Sharon Mazer, devoured her book, Professional Wrestling, Sport, and Spectacle, and then had this fascinating conversation. I have to say, I was absolutely disgusted by the things that I saw in the documentary. I had no idea it got so pornographic. Why did we look into a hotel room and see two men assaulting a woman on the floor?
I mean, Chris was the director, was prompting me. He was just showing me all these things. And of course, I've lived in New Zealand for 30 years now, and I, a lot of the time, haven't been paying attention. The clips that I was shown while we were filming were even worse than the clips that made it into the documentary. So just take a moment and imagine that. And if you've read Abe Reisman's biography of Vince McMahon, the stories are really, really awful. Reisman's biography comes out after they do most of the filming and the charges come out. So Reisman is the one who had the courage to go really deep diving into the ugliest corners of that without the cooperation of Vince McMahon, whereas the filmmakers were working with the cooperation of McMahon. They did beautifully to capture him on camera in the way that they did, given that he's very good at controlling his image. By the time I was being interviewed, they were certainly sharply focused on the treatment of women in the ring and in the industry more generally, because it was really vile what he did in plain sight.
I just thought it was the creepiest thing, knowing the accusations before I saw the film. He's the god of a world, and he manipulates everyone, male and female, and he basically acts out his cheating on his wife, his sexually harassing his employees.
How uncomfortable was my wife when I told Trish to take her skirt off?
I cannot believe that Mr. McMahon is putting his wife through something like this again. And what in the world is he going to do with Trish? Oh, no, my God. I can't believe Mr. McMahon is groping. I can't believe he's groping, kissing Trish like that in front of his own wife.
It's the male sexual identity, this thing that you're writing about in that Real Man chapter. It represents man's attempt to stave off a modernized or feminized modern life. And so you have this arena full of men. There was a wrestling journalist who described them and why they so enjoy seeing women abused and assaulted.
Wrestling was very much for guys, and guys who fantasized over hot women, but also kind of hated them because they could never get them. So therefore, seeing hot women demeaned was kind of cool to a lot of those guys. It's a very ugly way to say it, but that's exactly what it was.
I don't know if you've heard this term incel.
Yeah.
Involuntarily celibate.
Involuntary celibacy.
Yeah. So this is a huge part of the right-wing movement, okay? And you're saying they're rebelling against something. They are basically, by having this permission to hate women, to want to abuse women, to want to see them humiliated, even raped.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about that psychology of the mob. It's not you who's enjoying this. It's we are all enjoying it. And if I'm guilty, well, so is he, so is he, so is he, so is he, so is he. So it just gives you that, I guess, a shield.
That's the protection, the shield that kayfabe gives an audience, gives everybody in that space together, whether performers, professionals running the show, or the audience itself. If it's all kayfabe, then we don't have to take it seriously. And it is licensed. You can play at something, and you can have the pleasure of the playing and the knowing that you're playing without the responsibility for any of it, right? Because it's just entertainment, and it's just kayfabe. It's invented, it's imaginary, and in the real world, we wouldn't put up with that. But if that kayfabe drifts, as I think it has, and Josie calls it neo-kayfabe, and she argues that this is the new kayfabe where everybody knows the word, everybody knows the concept, and we still keep going, and where this has drifted into everyday life as well. And so I think, and this is where I've gotten into arguments with some academics who are obsessed with wrestling, but sort of think kayfabe is this nice little thing where you just sort of play with ideas, where you get the freedom to remake your world, because if you have an imaginary platform, you can remake it in positive ways as well as these negative ways. And I understand their desire to believe that kayfabe will allow for that, but I disagree with the idea that this is a good thing by definition, because I think more likely that we come to use the fictionality, the playfulness, we're just playing, we're just having a good time of these spectacles, whether it's wrestling at its worst or Donald Trump even at his best. I think it gives us plausible deniability, because we can say, yes, he did this thing, where he said, grab him by the pussy. But so what? He was just playing. Everybody does it. Oh, she just misunderstood. He was just talking to some people who'd come to see him talk on January 6th. And how was he to know that they would take it that far? In any case, they were just playing. This is a world in which the just playing covers a multitude of sins. And where if you are in earnest and if you insist on reality within that frame, then you don't have a leg to stand on, right? That insisting that it's real is what gets you into trouble. And I start to sound like Plato. I sound like I want to praise artists and then push them out of the ideal republic and lock the doors behind them. Because if it's just play, then it is somehow morally, ethically reprehensible that we would choose to play this way.
Yes, exactly. I mean, Vince McMahon acting out, abusing power, acting out two men raping a woman, ripping her clothes off, gives people permission to want those violations, not just violence, but sexual violence, to be committed against those pretty women that you resent, but also lust for.
And you being that male audience, that presumptively male audience.
Yeah.
The Freudian argument and the more classical theatrical argument would be that's a displacement, right? If you can displace those antisocial impulses, desires onto a screen or into an arena and see them played out, then that's released and you go back to your everyday life not wanting to do that because you've had that. You've let off that steam and you can go back into your everyday life.
Yeah.
Without acting on it further.
Let me put it very simply, Vince. I'm taller than you. I'm better looking than you. I think I'm stronger than you.
Wow.
And I'm here to challenge you to a match in Wrestlemania.
What? You're going to challenge me to a match at WrestleMania?
Absolutely right. I will kick your ass.
Oh!
I assume you agree with what Bob Costas says, that Donald Trump resembles much more a professional wrestler than a statesman.
Oh, I think I've been arguing since the election in 2016 that Donald Trump honed his performance with the help of Vince McMahon, first ringside in the 80s, but in particular in that period where he was performing in Battle of the Billionaires, and they had weeks and weeks of him coming onto the platform and doing bits with Vince McMahon performing the heel. McMahon would come out and really provoke the audience, and then Trump would walk out as the hero, standing for an assembled mass.
Mm-hmm.
The stance that he takes in relation to his fans, that's a professional wrestling imaginary that he's performing to. The model that he's aligning himself with is that of a professional wrestler, and it is the side of it that Vince McMahon constructed for him in Wrestlemania, because McMahon did the heel so beautifully, and because he set Trump up with money fluttering from the rafters at one point. He was clearly positioned as a babyface by Vince McMahon in WrestleMania 23.
Mm-hmm. Oh, certainly.
And I think if we don't respect that and see how constructed that was, we can't understand why he performed in the way he did at the Republican National Convention. And that was supported by, of course, Hulk Hogan.
And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again. So all you criminals, all you lowlifes, all you scumbags, all you drug dealers, and all you crooked politicians need to answer one question, brother. What you gonna do when Donald Trump and all the Trumpomaniacs run wild on you, brother?
Donald Trump reminded me of wrestling when he was the birther character on cable news. So he would come on to say, well, maybe Barack Obama isn't a United States citizen. He needs to show his birth certificate.
I think it's all Trump, and it's all Trump doing whatever he can to generate heat. I don't think he's assuming a different character. I think he's using a gimmick to generate heat, to provoke heat, to get a spike out of his audience and to keep them on his side. In the same way that Vince McMahon is always Vince McMahon, and before he decided to consolidate what fans of wrestling were thinking about him, before he decided to become Mr. McMahon.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I'm going to paraphrase, but you're basically saying they're rebelling against this, what they see as an oppressive change in society.
Yeah.
I guess the liberation of women.
When does Susan Faludi publish Backlash? That's
92.
She really diagnoses this wave of woman hatred,
yeah,
coming on the heels of what are some actually fairly modest advances that women had. So I don't think wrestling ever creates that environment,
right.
But they pick up on it. And if it sticks, then they'll do more of it. And the instant the audience wanders off, they'll do something new.
I think that Vince McMahon made his show particularly perverse because he could. He was the ringmaster. He was the god of that world. And he's acting out his own neuroses and his own perversions, fantasies about his daughter being raped either by him or another person. All of that stuff that's what happens when you have one man in control of a world.
It's his ideas.
Yeah.
And he's imposing his will on everyone around him, and he has the power. And that's what he was able to construct into the Mr. McMahon character of himself, the caricature of himself. He was able to take what he was and how he was functioning and blow it up a bit, and wasn't very far. As vile and violent and as woman-hating as those performances are, sometimes I wonder if we could just stop and look properly at it. We would go, yes, this is the way our society actually is working. We just don't tell the truth very often. So there's a way in which kayfabe makes space for telling a truth that isn't pretty and isn't something we really want to see and is quickly covered up in just playing, but is actually more truthful than a lot of the other stuff. that we tell ourselves as a society.
Well, when I was reading your book and you said they're rebelling against something they see as oppressing them, the feminazi is what Rush Limbaugh.
Feminazis. Oh, I used to listen to Rush
Yeah.
Limbaugh a lot.
So they were rebelling against something that oppresses them, and that is, I guess, that these women are now achieving a status economically and socially that's equal to men, and they have less power over them, and they want more power. Okay, so that's what's oppressing them, you know. But to my knowledge, they've never had a story where the things that oppress people are the actual things that oppress people.
No.
Right?
Good point. That's a very good point.
It's never
scapegoats. It's straw man scapegoat kind of territory. Because if you had to tell the truth, if those men who are embracing the woman-hating performance, the woman-hating spectacle, ever stopped and said, and this is being constructed to distract us from, to take our money in the first instance, because we paid for it, to distract us from the guys with the money outside the arena, closing our plants if we ask for more money, or making us work overtime without getting paid, or denying us some kind of dignity. There's a lot of, obviously, analysis about how those who are holding the power turn lower class white working men against people of color and women to distract them, essentially.
The invisible wage.
Yeah, so we shouldn't be surprised that wrestling just replicates that rather than challenging it. Because at base, we can argue the details till the cows come home. The real thing that wrestling does over and over again is propose an oppositional structure between them and us, the guy who fights for us and the guy who fights against us. And it's in that oppositionality and the violence of that, the showing of that, and the denial of the violence, the sure knowledge that for the most part, they're not actually hurting each other, that is really insidious socially. The proposition itself that two men or two women or any number of them, you know, can't get within 18 feet of each other without wanting to beat the crap out of each other. That's the problem. It's a structuralist problem. It is a structure that has us paying money to affirm that there are good guys and bad guys, and that in a just and true world, the good guy would win. But the world is so corrupt that often the bad guy wins. Justice doesn't necessarily work. And we're always, to some degree, being robbed of all that is right and good. And we're also, in that structure, made to focus so completely on the fight that we don't question whether or not it has to be a fight.
I was watching the WWF before Vince McMahon took over the world, but it was right when he took over from his dad. The thing that really stuck with me the most is that the bad guys were from Asia or Africa, or they were Pacific Islanders. And, you know, my mother's Chinese. And so I was watching it and not really aware, but I was joining in this sort of collective hatred of people who were like my mother and the people who were like my father, I guess, were supposed to be the patriotic heroes. And you know, I never had any love for Hulk Hogan. There wasn't a single thing I liked about him personally. What I did like about him was that he humiliated the people who intimidated me. And in that world, the people who scared me were always foreigners. And then we moved to Hawaii when I was 12. And somewhere around that time, I went to a professional wrestling match at Aloha Stadium with the local circuit type of thing. And I found it so dull because everyone was a person of color. Everyone was Polynesian of some kind, or, you know, there was none of this, you know, there was no racism. And I realized, oh my gosh, like I was only like a child, but, you know, maybe 12, 13 years old. I'm like, I don't like this. It's without the racism, there's nothing here for me. When I watched this documentary, I thought to myself, wow, I said goodbye to professional wrestling when Hulk slammed Andre the Giant. That was the end of the story for me. But every day since then, that sludge has continued to flow into our body politic, into the ethos of our country. As you write, the ethos of professional wrestling has escaped the arena. And I think to a larger degree than anyone realized, to the point when I do go to those Trump rallies, there was this couple that drove 4 hours on a motorcycle to see him speak. And I asked them what was really animating them and why they were there. And they said, well, it's about the frogs being turned gay. And I said, well, let's just talk about it, because I don't care if the frogs are gay. I have no bone to pick here. The both of them are saying, well, they're using the chemicals to turn the frogs against their nature, and they no longer show interest in the female frogs. So why does that matter? They said, well, then the government is going to put that in our water, and it's going to make all of us gay. I kind of laughed a little bit at one point, and the woman said, see, and then you're laughing at us. That's one of the things that really alienates us, is that you think that our stories and our narratives, the things that we care about, are stupid. And I really apologized, and I just was trying to understand where they're coming from. And ultimately, what they said to me is it's entertainment. We know it's entertainment. And Josie is I can't wait to read her book, because in the Politics and Prose conversation, she's kind of explaining how we got here, where it doesn't have to be true. It can be as stupid as they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, right? As long as they know
And
the
Josie is
game.
really right about this being an advance on the kayfabe that was such a secret when I started researching, when I started hanging out at the gym and watching the game. Now everybody says kayfabe. They practically parody it in the Mr. McMahon documentary. And Josie is right in proposing this idea of neo-kayfabe, where everybody knows it's kayfabe and they don't care.
Right.
Right? How can you not see that wrestling is fake? Well, people do see. And it's not really fake anyhow, because fake, define fake. Yes, the fight is fixed, but that doesn't mean wrestling itself is fake. It's a genuine performance art. And they're doing it right in front of you for real.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not fake. There's a truth being told. And if we don't look at it, to go into a Trump rally is to see a truth being told that you can't see any other way, and to come to understand something and to bear witness to that something that can't be understood or witnessed any other way. And that's that energy of the crowd and the truth that they're telling you about who they are to be there. That's really interesting. That is so interesting. Yes, they will admit that it's preposterous, but they say, don't stop us from really committing to this, because it gives our lives meaning. It allows us to organize ourselves towards whatever we want to do next.
The fact that they don't need a real reason to hate, like I think J.D. Vance said this when he was explaining to a journalist.
Cats and dogs thing.
Yeah, he said, yeah, well, we made it up, but there's a lot of people out there who hate immigrants, so
we
had
needed
to
a
make up
story to go
something.
with it.
Yeah.
That was probably his most honest moment.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's an end point here, because if you can see a riot at the Capitol and say they were just tourists, or that they were just in the wrong place, wrong time, we're so accustomed, because of the pervasiveness of the WWF at a critical point in not only American but world history. Our habits of watching have been very heavily conditioned. Even if you're not a fan, even if you poo-poo it and don't want anything to do with it, our habits of watching have been conditioned, and a lot of the media, it has to work the same sort of vibes, if you will, in order to keep our attention. So it's self-reinforcing. The dominant culture is very good at what it does. And you and I ultimately are being reminded daily of our place within that.
I don't understand your friends who are saying, well, oh, it's just pretend, it's just fun, and oh, they get to live out their rape culture fantasies and their racist fantasies in the arena, and then they go home and they forget about it. Well, I'm sorry, but Donald Trump is able to raise a mob to attack the United States Capitol using those same tropes. It's not just for fun and pretend anymore.
I think I have, in some sense, been a bit simplistic in representing their argument. And I also think that they don't see they see Trump as a heel. And so if Trump is a bad guy, it sort of alibis the professional wrestling audience to some degree, who are still playing with both sides, right? Whereas I'm arguing that Donald Trump is the babyface for his audience.
Yeah.
When you look at the way popular culture comes at us, you can't just propose that one day Trump fans are going to wake up, recognize the error of their ways, and cease to be racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic. So how do we give them, or how does the popular imagination or the social imagination produce something that they can attach to in the same way, that isn't life-destroying, that isn't violent at its core, that doesn't turn everyone into a brute, either the one with the fist or the one whose face is being hit by the fist, making brutes of the fans themselves along the way. How do we change that? How do we change the story when the rules by which, the narrative structure, the rules by which the story is constructed stay so remarkably consistent? If professional wrestling and the WWF in its heyday and the WWE even now are what the world is watching, they're also watching the world. And what they're showing us is telling us that truth. It is replaying it in a way that even if you hate the truth that they're telling, it's still telling you that that's the way it is. You can't deny it. So that horrible rape culture period in the 90s in the ring is still telling you the truth. It's telling you the truth about Vince McMahon probably and his allies, but it's also telling you the truth about the world. And that's why people stay and watch. And Donald Trump, all that lying that he does is telling us the truth somehow. That's a truth that he's performing. As you found with that couple and the gay frogs. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And they're telling you that's the truth. No, it might not be the literal truth, but it's the truth. It's the most dishonest thing in the world, what he does. And yet, in some ways, it's more truthful than anybody else.
Next time, Abraham Josephine Reisman, author of Ringmaster, Vince McMahon and the Unmaking of America, will go a bit deeper into the subject of neo-kayfabe. Wrestling Darkness is written, recorded, and edited by yours truly, Eric Byler. The music is composed by Michael Brook, performed by David Beninay and Stephen Munoz. Wrestling Darkness and other content you will find on the Eric Byler Substack feed are supported by ID Alliance, a 501c3 nonprofit. You can support us by subscribing or by making a tax-deductible donation. Thanks for listening.